Operation Collision Point has just released at the test server, and with it comes a new operator rework to Blackbeard and a few more minor reworks that messed up the meta drastically. So, with the season's full release right around the corner, in today's video I'll be doing a new and updated defender tier list, same as always. The operators will be ranked in alphabetical order, and timestamps will be in the description for your viewing needs. So now let's go ahead and get into the video. Now, the first operator I'm going to be placing on the tier list is Alibi, and she's going to be going in the middle of D tier. Alibi is an operator that is in desperate need of a rework right now because of the fact that her gadget is just kind of useless in most games. Alibi's gadget is her placeable clones that she can throw around the map that are basically just holograms that replicate what she looks like. And when enemies shoot these holograms, they are repeatedly pinged for a few seconds after shooting them. These traps are extremely situational because a lot of the times it's pretty obvious when you're looking at an Alibi clone or if you're looking at a real Alibi, because the Geminis do not copy her cosmetics. So if an Alibi player runs any sort of uniform or headgear, you can instantly tell whether their Gemini is real or not. And then on top of that, the base feats Gemini is pretty obvious as well. This makes Alibi have the weakest trap in the game, in my opinion. It just really isn't useful in a lot of situations. And then when you consider that she only has access to procs alarms and observation blockers, yeah, I think you can see why Alibi is going this low on this list. She does have a really good gun in the form of the MX4 Storm, but an operator cannot go high on my tier list just for having a good gun. And everything else about Alibi just really suffers. Now, moving past Alibi, we're now going to be placing Aruni, who's going to be going in the upper part of A tier. Aruni is an operator that a lot of people sleep on. Her having access to 3 of her gates allows her to block a whole lot of explosive utility. Her DMR is exceptionally strong for being on the defense. Her passive ability to make rotates and head holes for a team can be exceptionally strong for helping set up the bomb site. Her having access to barbed wire is really good as well because very few operators have access to that nowadays. And her having access to barbed wire is exceptionally strong because most operators nowadays don't have access to it. All of this combines to make Aruni's kit exceptionally utility heavy, which is why she's going to be going so high on this list. You get a DMR with an 8 cog and you get access to great utility whenever you pick Aruni. I think she has to go up in the A tier because she's by definition good every round. Now, moving past Aruni, we have an exceptionally strong operator on the defense, that operator being Azami, and Azami is going to be going in the S tier for me. Even with Ubisoft nerfing Azami's Kibas to where they can now be destroyed with bullets, I still think she's an operator worthy of S tier. Azami's ability to support her team in holding power positions is just realistically unmatched. Her Kibas can be used to cut off lines of sight. They can be used to stop the attackers from pushing through a specific breach or a doorway for a short period of time, and they can also be used reactionarily throughout the round in positions where the attackers are pushing from. This combined with the fact that she has barbed wire, which is strong for reasons I mentioned with Aruni, and that she has exceptional guns in the form of the ACS-12 and the VSN submachine gun, just makes her one of the most well-rounded operators on the defense, and I definitely think she belongs in the S tier. Now, after Azami, we have the next operator, Bandit, and Bandit's going to be going in the lower half of B tier. Bandit is an operator that is still pretty solid for doing one specific task, and that is bandit tricking. But outside of that, I don't think he's worth picking unless you're going to be doing that. The reason for this is because I feel like operators like Cade and Tuberow kind of just outclass him in most situations, and if you're just going to be placing his bandit charges on a wall, it's very easy for the enemy team to just impact EMP his bandit charges off. Whereas with Cade, you can more effectively hide his Cade charges somewhere around the map. So for bandit tricking, he is definitely a solid pick. But I think because of the fact that his gadget is countered by so many different operators and the fact that just other operators outclass him, I think I have to put him in the B tier. He has a good gun, he has access to a nitro cell, but that doesn't make up for the fact that his gadget's kind of fallen out of the meta a little bit. Now, moving on past Bandit, we have Castle, who's also going to be going in B tier, but he's going to be going on the upper part of B tier. I think Castle is an operator that a lot of people sleep on, especially in the lower ranks, because his ability to cut off lines of sight is just realistically unmatched. Being able to place 4 bulletproof barricades around the map is insane. And getting access to a secondary shotgun to make rotates for the team, having a bulletproof camera, and getting the UMP with an ACOG is all a nice plus as well. The real downside to Castle is his skill gap. A lot of players in Siege just don't know how to use him, and if you place his Castle barricades in the wrong places, it can be a huge detriment to your team. And when you compare that to an operator like Azami, who gets more of her Kibas and has arguably better guns and who doesn't have as high of a skill gap, I think putting Castle in the top of B tier makes a little more sense. He's definitely a solid pick if you know how to use him and you incorporate a setup around him, but on his own, I think he has to go in the B tier. Now, the same thing cannot be said about our next operator, Caveira, which is why she's going to be going in the bottom of D tier. Caveira has been an operator that has struggled for many, many years. Her gadget just realistically isn't that good because all it does is make her footsteps quieter, and if the enemy team just uses their drones properly and drones you out, you're basically going to get shut down anytime you try to roam with Caveira. When you combine this with the fact that her guns just are extremely weak compared to other roamers in the game, you can start to see why Caveira is in such a need of a rework. She doesn't bring any utility to her team, and her selfish ability is nowhere near strong enough to justify picking her when you don't bring any utility to your team. Now, moving past Caveira, we have an operator that has jumped up a lot for me on this tier list, and that is Clash, who's going to be going in the middle of C tier. Clash used to be an operator that I would say was in the D tier because she realistically just wasn't that useful in a lot of circumstances. However, I think now with the recent update, Clash is going to be a whole lot stronger. And that's because when Clash uses her electricity against the shield operator, it knocks their shield away. This means that now if you have a teammate play near you while you're playing Clash, and if a Montaigne starts pushing towards you or a Blitz starts pushing towards you and you electrify them, your teammate can then get a absolutely free kill on them. This also means that Clash is an exceptionally strong counter to Blackbeard as well, which I think he's going to have a strong influence on the meta. And so I think that combined with her great secondary gadgets and her pretty decent SMG makes her worthy of the C tier. I don't think she can go any higher than that because if the enemy team isn't bringing shield operators, those reasons for picking her kind of fade away. But if you're going to be using her to counter shield operators, she definitely is strong at that task. Now after Clash, we have Doc, who's going to be going in the bottom of A tier. I think Doc is the perfect example of an operator that is just good in every round. He brings barbed wire to the team. He has a secondary shotgun to help set up the bomb site. He has 3 of his stims to help heal your teammates or even revive them if they get into a bad situation. And he gets the MP5 with an ACOG, which is just a really fun weapon all around to use. He's probably one of my favorite operators to play in the game right now because he's exceptionally fun. And he's also pretty good in solo queue as well, because you can take a lot of bullets if the enemy doesn't hit you in the head. So because of that, I'm going to be putting him in the bottom of A tier. I don't think he's one of the strongest operators in the game, but he's definitely solid all around. Now moving past Doc, we have Echo, who's going to be going in the top of B tier. Echo can be useful for 2 main strategies. One, for helping your roamers by having his drones drone around the map and give them information. And the second way he can be useful is by denying the plant. If you set up Echo's drones around inside the bomb site and then you wait for the enemy team to go for a plant, you can use your yokai drones to force the enemy team off the plant. This can be strong. However, the issue is that Echo's drones can very easily be spotted. They make a whole lot of noise and they're no longer invisible, which means that the enemy team can just very easily hear them coming and shoot them before they're able to deny the plant, which is why I tend to use Echo to support my roamers. But either way, his drones are still pretty strong for gathering information for the team and to potentially deny the plant. And when you combine that with the fact that he has a great gun in the form of the MP5 SD and access to the Bearing 9 machine pistol and that he has a deployable shield, I really don't think that you can go wrong with picking Echo. He's definitely not an operator that you want to get in the habit of picking constantly because the enemy team will start picking operators to counter him. But if you want to pick him a couple of times a game, he can be a solid pick. However, Ella does not fall into that category, which is why I'm going to be putting her at the top of C tier. Ella is an operator that really has struggled a lot in metas recently, and that's because her traps just really can't compete with other trap operators in the game. All Ella's Grismot mines do is they concuss the enemy and produce a loud audio cue. When you compare this to operators like Fenrir, Lesion, or Melusi, she really just can't keep up. The only advantage that you get from picking Ella is that you have access to her deployable shield and you have her Scorpion Evo to your disposal, which has a fast fire rate and relatively low recoil, but all the other trap operators in the game also have access to good guns. So I find it hard to justify picking Ella. The only time that I think Ella is worth picking is if the enemy team habit of picking a lot of shield operators. This is because when a shield operator walks into a Grismot mine, it forces their shield away, which allows you to get a kill on them. And you can also keep your Grismot mines in pocket, so you can throw them at shield operators and force their shield away just throughout the round. So if you want to pick Ella to counter a shield operator, that can be strong, similar to Clash. But if you're not going to be picking her against a shield operator, I don't think it's worth it in most situations. Now moving past Ella, we have Fenrir, who's going to be going in the top of A tier. Fenrir, even despite the nerfs that Ubisoft has given him, is still exceptionally strong. He has the MP7 as his primary option. He has access to the Bailiff secondary shotgun, and he has access to a bulletproof camera, and then he gets 4 of his dread mines. These dread mines are still very useful despite them no longer being bulletproof. They can give you info on where the attackers are pushing from. They blind the opponent, which can potentially give you free kills, and when they're shot, you no longer lose access to that activation token like you used to, which means that even if a dread mine gets destroyed, it's not really that big of a deal. However, the one thing that is holding me back from putting Fenrir higher on this list is the fact that Twitch is just such a hard counter to him. If the enemy team notices that you bring Fenrir a lot, they will most likely pick Twitch and just get rid of all your traps very early on in the round. And that's why I'm going to be putting him in A tier and not an S, but he's still a strong operator worth picking in a lot of rounds. Now moving past Fenrir, we have Frost, who's going to be going in the middle of B tier. The reason why Frost finds herself in this position is because her Frost mats can be strong for denying the enemy team from going through windows, but that's the only real situation where Frost can really shine with her Frost mats. The reason Frost finds herself in this position is because her Frost mats are only really useful for stopping the enemy team from vaulting through a window or going up a staircase. And now, since enemies can just revive themselves out of a Frost mat, you have to play near all of your Frost mats or have a teammate playing near all of your Frost mats to make sure you get the most out of that utility. However, just because her traps are a little bit niche, it doesn't mean her kit as a whole is niche. She still has access to a secondary shotgun, her SMG is incredibly solid, and she has a deployable shield at her disposal. All of this combines to make Frost's kit one of the most universal in the game. But because her gadget is a little bit niche, I had to put her in the B tier because compared to other operators with the same utility, I don't think her gadget is as strong. Then moving past Frost, we have Goyo, who's going to be also going in the middle of B tier. Goyo is a solid operator for area denial. You can set up his Vulcan canisters on doorways into the bomb site or on common entry locations and slow down the attackers significantly. He could especially be useful on bomb sites like basement on bank, where there's only a few entrances, because he can deny the attackers from pushing into the site for a significant period of time. However, Goyo has a couple of downsides. However, Goyo has one big downside, and that is the fact that he can be easily countered. If the enemy team brings a lot of frag grenades or they bring a twitch, they can very easily destroy all of Goyo's canisters in one big swoop, especially if they're right next to each other. So if the enemy team knows you like picking Goyo, then they can come prepared. And while Goyo does have access to the TCSG and the Vector submachine gun, which are both exceptionally strong, I don't think they're strong enough to push him up into the A tier. He's definitely a solid one-off pick for specific bomb sites, but he's not someone you want to get in the habit of picking in every round. Now moving past Goyo, we have Jager, who is an operator that you want to pick in every round, and that's why I'm going to be putting him in the lower part of A tier. Jager is an operator that is almost fundamental to the defense's balancing. The defense needs to have an operator that can deny projectiles, and especially with the recent nerf to flashbangs that's coming in Operation Collision Point, Jager is going to be a whole lot more useful because it's going to take more operators to burn through all of his ADSs. And the reason why Jager is such a foundational operator to the defense is because without him, the attackers can basically just overwhelm the bomb site with all the flashbangs, smoke grenades, candelas, and frag grenades that they want. However, what holds Jager back from being pushed up into the S tier is the fact that his weapons and his secondary gadgets really are not that strong. He has access to a bulletproof camera, which is decent, and then his other secondary gadget, the observation blockers, are basically useless. And his 416 AR stats wise is the worst assault rifle in the game. And when you compare him to his competitor Wamai, I think you'll see why I don't have him super high up in the A tier or even an S tier. And moving past Jager, we have Cade, who's going to be going in the top of A tier. Cade is another one of those operators that is extremely foundational to the defense. Without Cade, the defense would look a lot different. Cade is the only operator on the defense right now that can electrify a hatch, which on its own makes him exceptionally strong. But when you combine that with the fact that one electroclaw can electrify 3 reinforced walls at once, and that his range is wide enough to where he can throw his Cade electroclaws in super hard to reach locations to hide them from the attackers, I think you can start to realize why Cade is so strong. His ability to hide his Cade charges makes it harder for the attackers to be able to counter him with impact EMPs or even a twitch, and then his ability to get hatches, like I said, is just unmatched. And when you combine that with the fact that he has the TCSG slug shotgun and a nitro cell at his disposal, you pretty much can't go wrong with picking him, and you should probably be doing so in every round. The only reason why he's not going higher on this list is because I do think he is somewhat balanced, because there's a lot of operators in the game that can be used to help counter him, like IQ and Thatcher. Now move past Cade, we have Kapkan, who's going to be going in the top part of B tier. Kapkan is just a solid trap operator. His Kapkan traps can very easily pick up some free kills if the enemy team isn't droning properly. However, that's the main issue. At the higher ranks where the enemy team is good at droning and they drone effectively, they're going to be able to spot your Kapkan traps and get rid of them relatively easily, especially if they figure out you're picking Kapkan by droning you out in the prep phase. Kapkan does have access to a nitro cell and a really strong gun in the form of the VSN, but I don't think that makes up for the fact that Kapkan's gadget is kind of fundamentally an operator that just thrives in low ranks and not really in higher ranks. And so because of that, I'm going to be putting him in the B tier. If you can manage to not get droned out during the prep phase, or if you just play in really low rank lobbies, then you probably can get away with picking Kapkan in a lot more situations. But in my experience in the higher ranks, a lot of times your traps will just get shot. However, that is not the case with Lesion, which is why he's going to be going in the top of A tier. Lesion was the hardest operator for me to place on this tier list because I almost borderline put him in S tier. The reason for that is because Lesion has a ton of his goos that he can spread around the map, which gives him a ton of information and deals a ton of damage to the enemy team. And he's probably one of the best shield operator counters, because when a shield operator steps on a goo mine, they have to pull out the goo at some point which forces them to put away their shield if they want to stop the damage from continuing. When you combine this with the fact that Lesion has access to a secondary shotgun to set up the bomb site, the T5 SMG, one of the strongest SMGs in the game, and a bulletproof camera, Lesion is just an operator that you can pick on pretty much every bomb site and every map and see success. The only thing that stopped me from pushing him up into the S tier is because I do think now that Legion's traps are no longer invisible, he is actually counterable, because if you hear a Lesion throw a goo mine down, you can kind of figure out the general location of it, and then you can just shoot it when you see it. Now moving past Lesion, we have an operator that isn't so strong, and that is Maestro, and he's going to be going in the middle of C tier. Now if Maestro didn't have a lot of counters, he'd probably be all the way up in A tier. However, Maestro struggles from something that many other operators in Siege don't really struggle from, and that is the fact that Maestro is countered by almost everything in Siege. Maestro can be countered by EMPs, he can be countered by explosives, and Brava and Dokkaebi can hack into his Maestro cameras, which can then turn his Maestro cams against his own team. This is just insane, and with all of these counters on the table, Maestro's utility can basically be shut down by any operator on the attack, because almost everyone on the attack has access to some form of explosive or some form of EMP. Maestro does have a secondary shotgun, he does have barbed wire, and he does have the Alda 556, one of the best LMGs in the game, but I think with how easy it is to deal with his cameras, I can't justify putting him any higher than the C tier. Ubisoft really should consider removing some of the counters he has. Now moving past Maestro, we have Melusi, who's going to be going in the middle of A tier. Melusi is an exceptionally strong operator in Siege right now. She has access to a secondary shotgun, impacts, and 4 of her banshees. This amount of utility on a defender is really just unrivaled. But Melusi does have a few downsides that stops her from being pushed all the way up into the S tier. And that is the fact that her MP5 doesn't have a magnification scope, which makes it hard for you to win gunfights with her, and the fact that she's so easily countered by Brava. If the enemy team brings a Brava, they can very easily hack into your banshees and turn them all against you, which can be exceptionally annoying to deal with. But outside of the Brava counter, Melusi is still exceptionally strong, which is why she's going to be going in the A tier, just not super high in A and not in S. Now another operator that has to struggle with a counter that in my opinion is more extreme is Mira, which is why she's going to be going in the top of B tier. Mira is an operator that suffers from being easily countered by one of the most picked operators on the attack, and that is Ash. Ash's breaching rounds when shot at one of Mira's windows can shatter it upon impact, which then leaves that window completely useless. This one mechanic alone hurts Mira a whole lot and has dropped her a lot on my tier list. But if you can bring a Jager and Wamai to protect her Mira windows, she can still be exceptionally strong on a lot of bomb sites. That's because she can give her team insane angles and lines of sight that is very hard for the attack to deal with if they can't get one of Ash's breaching rounds onto the window. And when you combine this with the fact that she has access to a secondary shotgun, the Vector SMG, and a nitro cell, I think you can see why she's going in the B tier. I just don't think she's good in every round, because you have to be on specific bomb sites and you have to pick specific operators around bringing a Mira for her to really shine. Now moving past Mira, we have Mozzie, who is an operator that has improved a lot over the past season, and that is why I'm going to be putting him in the lower part of A tier. Mozzie having 4 pests now is absolutely insane. It allows him to cover a lot wider of an area, which especially on a roam can be quite strong. So you can shut down a lot of drones with Mozzie, and when you combine that with the fact that he has 2 really strong primary weapons and a nitro cell or barbed wire, he's probably one of my favorite operators in the game to roam with. Now Mozzie's drone now definitely isn't as strong as Mute, but he's definitely on his way to competing with him. Now Mozzie's drone now capabilities isn't as strong as Mute, which is why he's not super high in this tier, but he's definitely on his way to competing with him. Speaking of Mute, I'm going to be placing him in the top part of A tier. And that's for pretty obvious reasons that all of you expect at this point. He has the shotgun SMG-11 combo, which allows him to set up the site and be a dangerous opponent in the close range. He has a nitro cell. He has 4 of his Mute jammers that can be used to deny drone work and to also potentially deny walls. And his Mute jammers can also be used to deny tracking operators on the enemy team like Lion, Dokkaebi, and Deimos. And the Deimos counter especially is strong because he's becoming pretty prevalent in the meta right now, and being able to just sit inside a Mute jammer to avoid a Deimos scan can be useful. Now moving past Mute, we have Oryx, who's going to be going in the bottom part of C tier. Oryx is very similar to Ela and Clash in the fact that he can be a decent operator for countering shield operators, but outside of that strategy, there's very few situations where Oryx can really shine. Oryx's Ramadash only really allows him to set up the bomb site for his team, and him having access to a secondary shotgun does help him do that further, but that's the only other thing it's really useful for. Outside of that, the only other thing that he can do with his Ramadash is run into an enemy to knock them onto the ground, and when you do that to a shield operator, it forces their shield away, which allows him to get a free kill on them. However, there is one part of Oryx that can be decent on certain maps, and that is the fact that he can jump up hatches. When you pick Oryx on a map with a lot of verticality like Cafe or Consulate, you can use this to your advantage to rotate in between floors very easily and make it hard for the enemy team to hunt you down with drones. And when you combine this with the T5 SMG he has at his disposal, he can actually be a pretty formidable roam roamer on those maps. But because he's pretty extremely map dependent, and because of the fact that his strength is also extremely dependent on the enemy team's operator lineup, I think I have to put him in the C tier. And the next operator, Pulse, is also going to be joining him right there in the same tier, in the top part of C tier. Now, Pulse is niche because of the fact that he's only really useful for one main task, and that is to pick up nitro kills through the floor. You can pick Pulse and play below a common entry point for the attackers, or just below the bomb site's floor, and then throw a nitro cell as soon as you see one of them on a soft floor. This can potentially pick you up a free kill, but Pulse is extremely vulnerable while doing this, because while his scanner is out, he can't have his gun out. And all the enemy team has to do is draw out your position, and you're basically dead. And when you combine this with the fact that he doesn't really bring a whole lot of utility to his team at large, because he doesn't really have a good way to help his team set up the bomb site, and when you consider the fact that he has the UMP without an ACOG, I think you can see why he has to go in the C tier. And speaking of the C tier, another operator that's going to be going there is Rook, who's going to be going in the lower part of C tier. Rook's gadget is entirely based around the revive mechanic. Rook's armor guarantees you go down instead of dying when the enemy team shoots you in the body, and then his armor also allows you to pick yourself up off of the ground. However, the enemy team gets a loud audio cue when they down someone with Rook armor, so they know you're going to be able to revive yourself, and the animation takes a whole lot of time. So the situations where you're going to be able to pull off that self-revive are slim to none. And when you combine that with the fact that he doesn't have access to a secondary shotgun like Doc does, and that he also doesn't have barbed wire like Doc does, and he only has access to impact grenades, I don't think you can justify picking Rook in a lot of situations. His armor can be nice for that little bit of extra HP, and to also counter a Kali if they bring one, but even in those situations, he's still not super strong, and so for that reason, I gotta put him in the C tier. Now, next up after Rook, we have Sentry, who's going to be going in the middle of B tier. Sentry is just a solid operator all around. Their gadget allows them to bring 2 secondary gadgets to the defense, which can be strong. For example, bringing the deployable shield and barbed wire, or bringing a nitro cell on the deployable shield. But the reason why they're not going higher on this list is because they're only really useful if your team has some major gaps in their secondary utility. If you notice that your teammates have 3 bulletproof cameras and you have no barbed wire and no deployable shield, Sentry can be strong in those circumstances. But that's kind of the only situations where you should be using Sentry, because you can get way more utility out of bringing 5 operators with good secondary gadgets on top of their main gadgets. And moving past Sentry, we have Skopos, who is going to be going in the middle of A tier. Skopos is probably my favorite operator in the game to play right now, and that is because her gadget is strong for catching the attackers off guard. At the click of a button with Skopos, you can just teleport from one robot to another, which allows you to take advantage of holes in the attacker's intel gathering, and it can also allow you to escape bad situations. If you're on a roam and you're getting surrounded by the attackers and you have nowhere else to go, you could just teleport to your other robot that's positioned somewhere else on the map, and then now you're safe. And when you combine this with the fact that Skopos' AR is solid and that she has access to impact grenades, I think you can see why she's going this high on this list, especially since her inactive robot can act as a deployable shield and a bulletproof camera in one. Now moving past Skopos, we have Smoke, who's going to be going in the upper part of A tier. Smoke is another operator that is a perfect example of a good all-around operator. He has barbed wire, he has the shotgun SMG-11 combo, which allows him to set up the bomb site, and he gets his smoke grenades that can allow him to deny entry from the enemy team, and that can be used later in the round to deny the plant. Just a really good operator all around, and I don't really think I need to explain much else about him because of how long he's been such a formidable operator in the game. The same cannot be said about Solis, who's going to be going in the middle part of C tier. Solis has had a major fall off over the past few seasons, and that's because of Ubisoft's multiple nerfs towards her. She now, when her gadget is active, can no longer see what gadget she's looking at through walls. She has to activate the overclock mechanic to be able to do that, and she can only activate overclock a certain amount of times per round. So this makes Solis a whole lot weaker because she cannot provide as accurate of information as she used to. However, I do think Solis is good for denying the plant later in the round, and she can still be a decent roamer. That's because Solis can still see the general location of where the attackers are placing electronics down. So if you see an electronic get activated in the bomb site, you can pretty easily tell that it's probably the attackers planting, especially if a lot of your team is dead and it's late in the round. Also, while on a roam, if you see an electronic moving towards you or in your direction, you can pretty easily tell that it's probably a drone, and then you can rotate accordingly. She definitely isn't nearly as strong as she used to be, but she can be decent in some niche strategies. That's not the case with Tachanka though, which is why he's going to be going in the top of D tier. Tachanka has a really slow gadget and a really slow gun that can make it really easy for the attackers to punish him. And when you combine that with the fact that other area denial operators just do his job better, like Smoke and Goyo, I don't really see any justification for putting him higher on this list. He can work on extremely niche bomb sites where there's only a few entrances and the doorways are kind of tight, but those situations are extremely few and far between. And even on those bomb sites, the attackers can just very easily run through his fire without issue. Now moving past Tachanka, we have Thorn, who's going to be going in the lower part of C tier, and that's just because her traps are really weak. The attackers can walk into her traps, activate them, and very easily walk out without taking any damage and having really any repercussions. The only thing that Thorn's gadgets can really do is just force the attackers to move in a direction, which you can use in some strategies to pick up some kills, but that's about it. The only real saving grace of Thorn is the fact that her gun is really good and the fact that she has a deployable shield. If she didn't have the deployable shield or the good gun, she'd probably be down in D tier. Now moving past Thorn, we have an operator that has improved a lot with Operation Collision Point, and that is Thunderbird, who's going to be going in the middle part of B tier. Thunderbird used to be an operator that I had all the way down in D tier, but she's now going to be going here because her Kona stations have gotten a whole lot better. Because now instead of just getting healed for a small amount of HP, Thunderbird's Kona stations will now heal you slowly up to full HP after you step into their radius. So all you have to do is walk into the Kona station and it'll start passively regenerating your health. And you can just leave the radius of the Kona station and it will continue to heal your HP until you're at max HP or until you get shot. This makes Thunderbird a whole lot less niche. And when you consider that, unlike Doc, she doesn't have to stay alive for the whole round since her Kona stations are placed inside the bomb site. She doesn't suffer from a lot of the same issues that other healing operators deal with. And on top of having access to our newly reworked Kona stations, she has a deployable shield as a secondary option, a really strong assault rifle in the form of Finka's AR, and she has access to the Spaz 15 shotgun and with the Bearing 9 secondary option. Honestly, I could see Thunderbird jumping a whole lot higher on my tier list as I play her more and more and as I get more used to her gadget, but I think right now, just to hedge my bets safely, I'm going to be putting her in the middle of B tier. I definitely could see her being up in the A tier, slightly above Doc as time goes on, but for right now, I think B tier is a safe position. Now moving past Thunderbird, we have Valkyrie, who's going to be going in the middle part of A tier. Valkyrie is another operator like Smoke that has just been dominating the meta for years on years now. And that's because she gives her team 3 extra cameras, which is strong for obvious reasons. Intel in Siege is extremely key, and being able to give your team that much extra intel is unmatched. And when you combine that with the fact that she has the MPX, an extremely low recoil weapon, and access to a nitro cell that meshes really well with her gadget, I think you have to put her up in the middle of A tier. Now after Valkyrie, we have Vigil, who's going to be going in the middle of B tier. I think Vigil is an operator that has improved a lot recently as the meta has progressed. And that is because people have started using the Boss G and realizing how strong it is. Being able to kill an attacker in one hit with a well-placed shot is strong. And when you combine that with the fact that he has access to the SMG-12, a really good machine pistol, and that his gadget allows him to hide from cameras, which can be strong on a roam, I think you can see why he's going in the B tier. He's definitely not the strongest roamer in the game, and you'd probably be better off picking operators with more utility like Mozzie. But if you're in the mood for a fun-to-use roamer, then you can't really go wrong with picking Vigil. Now after Vigil, we have Wamai, who's going to be going in the upper part of A tier. And that's for pretty obvious reasons. Wamai is basically just the better form of Jager. He has better guns, he has access to better secondary gadgets, and his primary gadget is arguably better as well because it can capture a larger variety of projectiles and he can capture more of them throughout the round. So with all of that being said, Wamai has to go up in the top of A tier. You can honestly even make the argument for him being in S tier. And after Wamai, we have Warden, who's going to be going in the upper part of B tier. And the reason for that for me is because of the fact that he has a deployable shield at his disposal, the shotgun SMG-12 combo, and the fact that his glasses are just so fundamental to the defense. If the defense didn't have Warden, then operators like Ying could just go unchecked in most matches. But with Warden in the game now, you can very easily counter that. And so if you notice the enemy team likes to do a lot of rush strategies and they like to play very aggressive, then picking Warden could be a solid choice for you. Because with your glasses, you can stop them from flashing you, and then you can deal a ton of damage with your shotgun SMG-12 combo whenever they decide to push you. And so because of all those reasons, I'm going to be putting him in the B tier. He's definitely not an operator that deserves A tier because if the enemy team doesn't bring a lot of smoke grenades or flashbangs or some form of utility for Warden to counter, then he's not really worth bringing. But if the enemy team is bringing that kind of utility, then Warden can be a strong choice. And the final operator is Tuberal, who's going to be going in the S tier. Tuberal's ability to deny breaches is really strong because all she has to do is just throw her canisters on a wall when a hard breach charge starts to go off on a wall, and she can just deny it immediately. This also applies to hatches as well, which means that Tuberal is technically the second operator to be able to counter hatches in Siege. She can't do it as effectively as Cade because they're not electrified. The gadget's just being frozen, so they just have to wait out your Zoto canister for the wall or the hatch to get opened, but it's still a strong gadget nonetheless. And it's not nearly as counterable as operators like Bandit and Cade because Tuberal canisters can't be EMP'd like they can. So it makes it a whole lot harder for the attackers to counter a Tuberal unless they can get an explosive or a Twitch drone into the bomb site. At the higher ranks, she just absolutely dominates and makes it a whole lot harder for the attackers to get a breach open. Anyways, that wraps up today's tier list. As always, these videos are strictly my opinion, and if you disagree, feel free to leave your takes in the comments down below. If you enjoyed today's video, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. Now, if you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.